area. It's meeting great people. And our guest tonight is the president of Executive Management Services, David Bego from Indianapolis. David employs over 5,000 people in 36 states. David has written the book, The Devil at My Doorstep. The author's expertise to write this book, as noted on CNN's Lou Dobbs program in the spring of 2009, stems from his actual first-hand experience while waging war with Andy Stern and the SEIU from late 2006 till the present day. Unlike other corporate executives who either compromise their core values and cave into union demands, or those who simply talk about what it would be like to face financial disaster based on fighting back against one of the most powerful unions in existence today, the author has lived the experience while under attack from Stern and his union thugs for more than 3 years and counting. And I think, do we have David on the line?
I'm here, Rick and Rick. How are you guys doing?
Well, Dave, what I like to say, and I've said it many times, you are one of my personal heroes because you're fighting back. And I know from my internet and my email, you're fighting this fight every day.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your comments and confidence. It's one of those things that I think we as Americans need to understand what's going on and stand up and do something about it.
You know, Dave, until I met you, until I got involved with this movement, a lot of people don't pay attention to what's going on between businesses and unions. You'll be the first one to say, and I think I'm one of the first ones to say, that we're not anti-union. But the tactics that are used to unionize businesses such as yours are what is not reported by the media, and the experience you go through, or you went through, and some of your colleagues, never reported by the media. So we maybe want to get into a little bit of that, but before we do that, maybe just give the listeners out there a little bit of your history, how you got started, and a little bit about your industry.
Well, I appreciate that, and just to tail on what you were saying about people, this happening across the country and people not being aware and the media not reporting it. I got a call today from Paul Sorum, who's running for governor out in North Dakota, and he saw my blog on biggovernment.com yesterday, and he's called me and said, he's had the same type of problems out there, and he's glad to see somebody stand up and would like some recommendations on how to fight the issue that he's got out there. So I think we're making a difference, and that's one thing I wanted to get in early in the show. As far as my story is, and you guys have heard it a couple times when I've spoke, but briefly, I came out of college and I worked for a agribusiness company, and I ran feed mills and soybean processing plants and grain elevators around the country. I was a turnaround specialist for them, and the way I did it was to take care of the people working in the plant, make sure that they had good working conditions, and the break rooms and locker rooms were clean, and that management interfaced with them, and we had good relationships. And that's what we did to move these plants from non-performing to performing plants. And the interesting thing about that is we could do that within 12 to 18 months, and they were all union plants, and we never had a problem. The rank-and-file people bought into it, they liked it, and we turned them around and moved on. Unfortunately, as I went through my career with the company, I got to a point with them where they basically gave me an ultimatum where, you're going to move from Indiana, and we were back in Indiana at the time, in Indianapolis, and turn around a plant for us in Kansas City. And being the Hoosier that I am, I didn't want to leave. My kids didn't want to leave. My wife didn't want to leave, and we. So I told them, no, look, I want to stay here in Indiana. And
David, if I can interrupt you here for just a second, I'd like to tell the listeners out there, most of them probably are Hoosiers, this is the part of your address when you speak to people and you give your speeches like at our rallies. This is the part where you get really emotional, because I can just feel your Hoosier pride come out when you're speaking what you're speaking about right now. And you really do get emotional because you are a proud Hoosier, and not to mention a very good person. So I just wanted to point that out before you go any further.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do. I don't seem to do it on phone interviews as much as I do when I'm in person. It's having the people there, in front of you, I just it kind of wells up in you. But
oh, sure, yes.
And I can't control it; it just happens. But
you don't lose control, though. I want to point that out too.
well, I've learned to keep it at a
some in the audience do.
Yeah, but you know, the interesting thing is that when I told the company, I worked for Central Soya at the time, I said, "Look, guys, you know, I've got a wife and 3 kids. You know, we love Indianapolis. Our kids are getting into school. We want to stay here in Indiana." And they said, "No, you're going to go. You're a young man. This is what you're going to be doing the next 10 years." And that's when I left the company. I did some consulting for about 6 months, and then I got into the cleaning business with another company. And what was interesting about that is I didn't really want to take the job because I didn't feel the guy that owned the company and managed the company was a very good manager. And I turned it down once, and he came back, and I took the job. And it turned out to be just what I thought it would be. And within 3.5 years, I left him because of the way he treated people, the way he managed. And I started EMS, Executive Management Services, in 1989. And I tried to build that company the way I thought people should be managed and treated and all those type of things. And as we grew from myself and my wife working part-time to a company of almost 4,000 employees or more back in 2005, we tried to make sure our people were paid above industry standard and they had benefits, you know, health and vacation and holiday and all those type of things.
And David, as you pointed out, in this particular industry, I think it was kind of maybe not very common that your type of business where the employees did get benefits, vacation time, overtime, that kind of thing. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. Now, most of them pay overtime if they're employing the people as employees and not independent contractors. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different subject to get into that we fight in the industry. But the thing is, yeah, we were trying to do these things because we wanted to be known as a company that you know, kept our employees, had good employees, low turnover, and those type of things.
And David, could I point out, I really want the listeners to pay attention to what you're saying about how you run your business and your inherent concern for your employees. This is a backdrop to what we're going to, or you're going to explain as to what happened to your business later on in your story. But I want people to understand the kind of person you are and how you treated your employees.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate that. And we tried to do all these things, and, you know, we had all these opportunities out there for people. The other thing is employing more full-time people than part-time, which is, you know, in our industry, most of our competitors like to go with part-time employees because they don't have to provide the benefits. And so we built this company on that. We continue to grow, and by 2005, we were, like I say, we were over 4,000 employees and growing, and in 33 or 34 states at that time. And I was just shocked that I received a letter from the Service Employees International Union that basically said, "We want to meet with you, and we want to do it soon. We want to talk to you about your employees and organizing them." And knowing who the SEIU was, I threw the letter in the circular file and ignored it.
I've got a circular file at work myself.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they didn't leave me alone. They started leaving me voicemails and sending me emails telling me that it would be in my best interest to meet with them. You know, a veiled threat.
Only yours, not theirs.
Yeah.
David, one case, Rick, the taller Rick, Rick Barry's minion. Our listeners should know that we're talking to David Bego, who is the author of The Devil at My Doorstep. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave. What?
Yeah. So the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, they were leaving these veiled threats, and I finally decided to meet with them. And at the meeting, they basically told me that, you know, we can help your employees. And I said, okay, show me how. Well, of course, they didn't bring anything to the meeting. And they, in the same breath, they said, we want you to sign a neutrality agreement. I said, okay, do you have a copy? No. I said, well, I'm not going to sign anything that, you know, I haven't read first.
Did you know what a neutrality agreement was before?
I had never seen one. I had heard of one, but I really didn't know the details of it. And So we left this meeting, and they said they'd send me stuff. Well, a month or so went by, and all they sent me was emails saying, we're getting impatient with you because we want you to agree to sign the neutrality agreement. And finally I said, look, if you have any chance of me signing anything, you better send it to me. So they sent it to me, and that's when I got the details of the neutrality agreement. And the neutrality agreement is the genesis of the Employee Free Choice Act, or card check. And basically what that is when unions are trying to organize employers' employees, it eliminates the secret ballot election. That coveted election that we have when we vote for our politicians for office. They didn't want our employees to have that. On top of that, it put a gag order on me, which I couldn't talk to my employees about what was going on. I had to sign a letter written by the union that basically said I was in agreement with the union policy and philosophy. And to me, the most, onerous of all was that I had to give them a list of every one of my employees and their home addresses. And that's because now that there was no secret ballot election, it reverts to card check, so they could go out to these people's homes and, push their ways in their homes and intimidate them into signing cards. Because under card check, the scenario is if they get 50% of your people plus one to sign an agreement, you're automatically union. That's it. And so I read this thing, and we had one more meeting with the union here in Indianapolis, and they had their president out of Chicago, their Midwest president, and their contract manager out of Cleveland. And it was a fairly cordial lunch, and we're sitting there, but the contract manager for the SEIU, he kind of gets a feeling from my questions that I'm not going to sign their agreement. And he looks at me and he says, Mr. Bigo, you're not going to sign the neutrality agreement, are you? I said, I have no intention of signing that agreement. It's morally wrong for me to give my people's rights away to a secret ballot election, and I'll never sign it.
Absolutely. David, and I think it was right about this time that we're discovering the devil at your doorstep. I want to point out that not just this, but other things that some of these people have come up with, some of these bills and acts, they call this the Free Choice Act. They named these things the complete opposite of what they are. It's just like when we heard about the healthcare, they kept talking about choice and competition. When we're finding out the healthcare is going to destroy choice and competition, we hear about, they call it the Affordable Care Act. We're finding out that it's going to be anything but affordable once it comes into place. And so we get to the Free Choice Act. These people name these things, they sound good, but they're the exact opposite of what they really are.
You're exactly right, Rick. These people are very crafty. We shouldn't underestimate them. They're very smart. They know what they're doing, and they know how to misrepresent things like titles of bills and other things.
Or like yourself and your business.
Yeah.
Which we'll find out about.
Yeah, and and as we fought them, we saw it all the time as we went through what they call a corporate campaign against us. But you see it today in our administration. They misconstrue the truth. They talk in vague terms, and they always come up right to the edge, and maybe not quite lie, but they're there. And they know a lot of people will listen to them. Those people that are naive and easily, convinced, and they believe that if they can put enough pressure on you publicly, that you'll either fold from a psychological standpoint or fold from a financial standpoint. And at that meeting that I was just talking about, the contract manager, Dennis Dingo, looked at me and he says, Mr. Bigo, we enjoy conversation, but we embrace confrontation. And we're going to attack you, your employees, your customers, and everybody associated with you.
And that just sends a chill up my spine. It really does.
Well, it is. And, this is what they do. And, I looked at him and I said, do what you got to do. And
David, not to interrupt you, but what this reminds me of, maybe in a more graphic description, is the mobs back in the 30s, the protection racket, where they would come into businesses, and if you didn't pay them protection money, actually you're protecting yourself against them. they'd either destroy your business or break a leg or whatever. It's almost the same thing. I'm not going to say they're there to break your leg, but they're definitely there to break your will.
Well, and I think your analogy is correct. They look at it from the standpoint, they can't break arms and legs anymore, and shoot people and stuff like that because there's so much scrutiny. But what they look at it is from the standpoint is we're just going to break you psychologically or financially. They know that most businesses will not stand up to the scrutiny and the public awareness and will back down because they don't want to be in the spotlight all the time, and which is really a shame. We need to get people to say, look, take your best shot. We don't care. And here's the reason. And I put this in my blog this past week. 95% of the population doesn't pay attention to this stuff.
Exactly.
But
and Dave, you're the good guy. You're the guy that started out with nothing, with a family, a wife and kids and a dog to support. Started out with nothing and built a business, probably risked everything you had, built a business, put 5,000 people into the middle class, and they portray you as the bad guy. And I tell you what, that really, well, I won't use the word, but it really ticks me off.
Well, I understand, but that is the way they work, and you see the same tactics today in politics, especially with this administration, because our president was trained by the SEIU. I mean, I think I've sent you videos you've seen where he openly admits that he's been a part of the SEIU and supported them his whole adult life, and he wants to help paint this country purple, which is SEIU colors.
Absolutely.
What is your blog, David? And we're talking to David Bego, the author of Devil's My Doorstep. And if you have a question for Mr. Bego, call 877-953-0953, and we're also on Facebook, Sons and Daughters of Liberty. What is your blog? And I know you send, Rick and I are on your email list as well.
Yeah, the blog is devilatmydoorstep.wordpress.com, or they can go to the book site, The Devil at My Doorstep, and you can sign up for the blog there too.
And you can purchase the book at that website.
Absolutely.
I read the book. I highly recommend it to all our listeners.
Well, it's interesting. It's amazing, guys. I get a lot of comments from people that don't think that they'd enjoy that type of book, but once they read it, they really enjoy it. And I'm talking from older people to younger people. One of my employees' son was reading it the other day, and he says, "I can't believe this stuff goes on in America." And I said, "I know, and that's why I wrote the book."
Well, me too. Until I think you told your story at the first tea party you came to, I was kind of dumbfounded.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it might help your listeners to hear a couple stories, if you don't mind if I relate those.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to give a backdrop of your background, what a good guy you are, so once we get into this, people understand what a good guy went through.
Well, I appreciate that. They once we had that meeting with the SEIU, they about 30 days later, they started their attacks on us. Hand billing and trying to intimidate our employees and filing unfair labor practices against us and picketing and rallies and like. I think probably everybody's seen the rallies up in Madison, Wisconsin with the banners and all that kind of stuff against the governor and his programs up there. We had the same thing in downtown Indianapolis against us because I wouldn't sign the neutrality agreement. And
that was outside your building?
Yeah. And what really irritated me the most was, not coming after me, was coming after the employees. And one of the stories I've told and you've heard is that, we had a gal come out of a tower in downtown Indianapolis, and the union organizers said, "Look, we want you to sign this card." And she told them, "Look, I'm not interested. I'm happy. Please leave me alone." And they kept this up for a week or so, and then they started offering her money to sign the card. And she says, "I'm not interested. Please leave me alone."
And again, this is part of the Free Choice Act, ladies and gentlemen. The Free
Yep.
Choice Act is what these people are going through.
And they'd even followed her car and hold her car door shut, trying to convince her. And, this was a mid-50s lady, and she was terrified. And she actually asked us to have our supervisors walk her out at night because she was afraid. And she even had the police intervene one time for her. But this kept going on for a couple of months, and finally they came to her one night, got her alone, and said, look, you're going to be union whether you like it or not, sign the card. And she did. And we know this because as we fought the SEIU over almost a 5-year period, we had them in an appeals hearing where this lady wrote this in an affidavit. And these aren't stories that I make up. With Halloween coming up, probably ought to tell the Halloween story.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and in our neighborhood here where I live, and one of our customers live, on Halloween night in 2007, the SEIU had little kids come to our doorstep and get candy. And when they got the candy, they would hand a flyer to our, of course, us and to our neighbors that said, House of Horrors, every night, buildings cleaned by EMS, people are abused and mistreated. And while this was going on, they had union thugs in cars driving up and down the street. Our neighbors were terrified.
Dave, to me, there's nothing more despicable than using children to try to get your whatever means you're trying to achieve, using children to do it.
Well, I agree 100%, and they did it a couple other times. One, I was playing golf on a Saturday morning, and the golf course I was playing golf at, they picketed the golf course, walked right out on the 10th tee box in the putting green area, and were rallying, and they had little kids with them on a Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they were chanting, EMS must go, Dave Bigo must go.
And that's part of the defamation we're talking about. Hey, Dave, not to interrupt, but we do have a Facebook question for you. And this is from Thelma in Madison. Thelma asks, in 2001, Oklahoma became the 22nd state to become a right-to-work state. They have seen a manufacturing GDP growth of 45% versus average manufacturing growth GDP of only 22% in non-right-to-work states. Do you think Indiana will ever become a right-to-work state? Thank you, Thelma.
Thelma, that's a great question, and I certainly hope so. It's one thing I'm a big proponent of. I've been working with some of our politicians on the state level to try and get that introduced and passed, hopefully this next year.
And I want a follow-up question. I think about I think it's North Carolina where Boeing wants to locate. Is that right?
Right.
North Carolina. And you see, what right does the government have to step in and tell a private business what they can or can't do? That is the most un-American thing. It's going on right before our eyes. Where's the outrage? Obviously, there's outrage from a lot of us, but not from enough of us that this kind of thing goes on.
Well, that's exactly right. But people, and this, I want to back up. This issue that we're talking about is extremely complicated because there's so many moving parts in it.
Sure.
And unless you're involved all the time and appreciate what's going on behind the scenes and the pressure the unions are putting on businesses and employees every day across the country, it's really hard to fathom what all is taking place. But I think this is a key point that your listeners need to understand, is this administration is in bed with big labor. And, they helped them get elected. They were a big part of it, them and Acorn and some other people. And they want their paybacks. They also want and need more money for the upcoming election next year. So they are in a tremendous hurry to make sure that there are regulation changes or laws passed that will allow them to force unionize people as quickly as possible so they can bring in union dues and then feed that money into next year's election.
David, this is Rick again, Rick Berry, and in that regard, I got one of your emails today, and I just want to give out, you've got a statistic of a bunch of different unions and what they've given into the Democrats and what they've given to the Republicans over the last 20 years. I'll just give a couple examples. The American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees over the last 20 years gave $40,281,000 to the Democrats. They gave $547,700 to Republicans. The Brotherhood of Electrical Workers gave $29,705,000 to the Democrats, $679,000 to the Republicans. The National Education Association gave $27,679,300. to the Democrats and 2,005,000 to the Republicans. And this goes on and on. There's a long list, but in every case, it's at least 10 to 1. So we're seeing this vicious cycle of money going into one pocket and out another, and it's
money laundering.
It's not American.
Well, and you're both exactly right. It's a money pump. It's money laundering, and the Democratic Party, for the most part, is a recipient. Now, I have to tell you, there are Republicans that are on the dole on these too.
Sure.
And these people are desperate to stay in power. In my mind, my dad used to say all the time, he says, people work in politics because they can't make it in the private sector. And I think he had a pretty good idea. And, these people, they want to stay in politics because they make good money and have good benefits. And the only way they can do that is to take care of their buddies. And in the Democrat Party, that's where most of the union money goes, from the dues that the members pay.
And the members do not have any recourse as far as how what their dues go into. The Beck decision in '78 basically, has been eviscerated over the years. It seems like.
Well, that's right, and they're so clever. And I want to say this again: they're crafty and they're clever. When they have people sign up, a lot of these people don't even know what they're signing when they join a union. And they don't know where their money's going. But I will tell you, there is a move afoot. These people are starting to wake up. As I said earlier, I'm not anti-union. It's not the rank-and-file people that are the problem. It's the big labor bosses that don't want their way of living, standard of living, to go away, and the politicians that support them. And, they're desperate people, and they're going to do desperate things. And what we're seeing is that a movement, like there's a gal in California, her name's, we call her Miriam the Mighty, and another gal, Erica Sewells, who are fighting the SEIU out there and have their sights on trying to decertify the SEIU out there. And because they're tired of their money being spent on politicians that they don't approve of.
Absolutely. And when we talk about these union bosses, I mean, obviously we're not here to badmouth the workers, but I just wonder with these dues they're collecting, how much really goes to their enrichment versus the workers they're supposedly trying to help. I want to say one thing, David, and you know all about this. In President Obama's first 7 months, by far the number one visitor to the White House, 22 times he visited the White House in the first 7 months, was Andy Stern, the president of the SEIU. We're also told by the internet that the AFL-CIO president, Richard Trumka, talks to the president every day and visits the White House at least twice a week. And what do you think they're talking about?
Well, it's obviously the paybacks that I was referring to. And this might help people a lot. I don't talk about this all the time when I speak, and I probably should a little bit more. The unions early on, I think, did some good things for the common worker. We got rid of 80-hour work weeks.
Absolutely.
Kids being pushed into work and all that kind of child labor laws and all that kind of stuff. But what happened is the unions became thugs, and the way that they were organizing people back then was through what they want today, card check, the Employee Free Choice Act. In other words, they could go out and they get 50% plus one, the people to sign up, the employees to sign up. They go to the owner and say, hey, you're going to be union. We got more than 50% of your people signed up. Well, the government in 1947 realized that this was a problem, and they passed the Taft-Hartley Act. And the Taft-Hartley Act put in the provision for the secret ballot election. Now, at that time, the unions were at their highest membership rolls in the history. I mean, they were something like between 40 and 50% of the workforce was unionized.
Mm-hmm.
Since that law was passed, and by the way, it was vetoed by the president at that time, and Congress overrode it, the union roles have declined significantly. Today, they represent 13% of the workforce and only 6.9% of the private workforce. the unions know they have nothing to sell. People don't want them. They're not signing up. So the only way they can get back to where they were and increase their financial position is through card check, and that's why they want it back.
We're talking to David Bego, author of The Devil at My Doorstep. We're here on Rick at Night, the voice of liberty here in the Ohio River Valley. We asked for your questions primarily over Facebook tonight, but we also have a call-in number, 877-953-0953. And Dave, we have a question from Clyde in Columbus. How much are union leader bosses paid yearly?
Well, it depends on different ones, but I'll go back to the story I was telling you in California. These gals that were are fighting the SEIU out there. The president of their particular local 1000 just decided that she needed about a $100,000 a year raise, and was processing that through the ranks when these gals stepped in and objected to it. And her reasoning was that she also had a full-time job with the Department of Motor Vehicles or something like that, and to keep up with all the union activity also, that she was entitled to a huge raise like this. And on top of that, a couple of her sidekicks were going to get, I don't know, like $75,000 raises. It totaled up to almost $290,000 for 3 people.
And that's just in raises.
And it's just like taxes. It's like taxes. They're spending other people's money.
That's right. And these gals out there, I'll give them credit. They're fighting, and they're fighting hard against this stuff. And that's the thing. People don't know what all they make. I know Andy Stern, when I wrote the book, as head of the SEIU, purportedly was making about $250,000 a year, plus all of his benefits on top of that. And then I know he got a book deal with them that they funded and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of them do very well.
I'm sure the benefit package is unreal. And I also wanted to ask you, David, Mary Kay Henley, she's the new SEIU president?
Yes, she is.
Is she taking the same tact as Mr. Stern? Or is she a little easier to get along with?
Well, she's not as flamboyant. She's not as active publicly. From what I've heard is that she's, her views are just as radical as Andy Stern. I mean, Andy Stern basically admits in his book that he believes in socialism, and the understanding she's the same way. What I've found interesting, she seems to have the low profile. There doesn't seem to be as many corporate campaigns going on. By the way, that's what the campaign they ran against my company, that's what they call them, corporate campaigns. And you can go out on the internet. I think you could probably Google it now, and you can find the whole training manual that they use to train people to do all these things like they prosecuted against us.
And while you were being attacked, I think they had the corporate campaign going in. Was it Cincinnati and Cleveland? Is that correct, David?
Yeah, well, they had Cincinnati and Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, okay.
Yeah, and then they were coming after us in St. Louis and threatening us in Pittsburgh. And the thing is, guys, is like I say, she's keeping a little bit lower profile, but I know some of these things are still going on because I've been communicating with a guy in Boston that has a cleaning company. It was his grandfather started it, and his dad, and now he's got it, and he's at the point. He made a comment in one of his last emails to me. He says, "This is so bad." He says, "I just want to go back to a normal work day in a work week because it would be a vacation."
Right.
I mean, he is just I'm afraid he's going to give in. And I keep trying to help him stand firm, but I don't know what's going to happen with him. But these things are going on every day.
Well, David, you use an analogy in your speeches, and it's stuck with me. And you call this a death by 1,000 cuts, that it's relentless, it's nonstop, it's one thing after another. It slowly breaks you down. You've seen some of your friends in the same industry break down. You've managed to hold out. And I know you had one friend, I think, was going to be divorced. Is that correct?
Well, one of our competitors down in Cincinnati, yeah. He was standing firm too, which was good to see. And but other things they do, they put little press releases out, and they'll hand out flyers all around downtown against you. Like against us, they filed an OSHA complaint against us that we were forcing our people to take human body parts out in bags at night from a local college, not even a medical college, okay? And then they handed out flyers in downtown and had a press release released on it in Cincinnati. Well, this poor guy was going through the same type of thing, and his wife finally went to him and said, look, sign the neutrality agreement. I can't put up with it any longer, or I'm going to divorce you. So he signed it.
You know, what would you do? What would I do? I'd probably sign it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to put you in an untenable position, however they can do it. And a lot of people, I think I mentioned this in my last speech, I don't know, but I was having breakfast with a guy out of Fort Wayne a few months ago. And he's got a manufacturing company, a nice size one. And he had read the book, and he says, I agree with you, I support you and all that. He says, but Dave, I don't want to be in the public eye. I don't want them to know my name, because if they came after me, I couldn't hold up like you did.
Sure.
And
sure.
Guys, unfortunately, that's the biggest problem we have is, and I believe this is true with the media too, with Fox and some of the mainstream media is that they're afraid that they're going to go after their advertisers, they're going to lose revenue, and they're going to be in trouble.
Sure.
And I think we saw that with Glenn Beck. I think that's why he's not on Fox anymore.
I believe you're right. Again, that website for if you want to purchase The Devil at My Doorstep, www.thedevilatmydoorstep.com. The phone number, if you want to call in and ask a question, 877-953-0953. And you can ask a question on Facebook, Sons and Daughters of Liberty. David, I want to go into this Occupy Wall Street movement. What do you know as far as what kind of involvement SEIU and some of the other unions have with organizing these kids and getting them to come there and somehow afford to stay there for weeks at a time with no jobs?
Well, I don't know that there's any direct link, but we see a lot of things going on. If you look in the crowd, you'll see some of the signs and T-shirts and that of some of the unions. And then, there's a former SEIU official that came out and actually at one of the Occupy Wall Street parties said, here's what we need to do. We need to do these certain things to bring down Wall Street and the banking system.
Is that Stephen Lerner?
Stephen Lerner.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And it's pretty interesting that you see these things. The other thing is, and I'm working on a blog right now that I hope I'll get done here tonight or tomorrow. But the gals out in California sent me a couple of videos, and they're off of the SEIU's own website, and they talk about being involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement. So yes, they are. Okay. The other thing is when they had the one here in Indianapolis a couple of weeks ago, is that I actually heard one of the radio stations interviewing a gal by the name of Allison Luthi. She is the head of Jobs for Justice here, and she is also one of the groups that helped the SEIU fight against me. And Allison Luthi, during that interview, came right out and said, because I heard it, I was driving my car somewhere, and I couldn't believe it, and I heard it. She says, we see this as an opportunity to organize more people into the unions to grow the unions.
Absolutely.
So that tells you everything you need to know.
And, David, when I hear these people use terms like social justice, jobs for justice, workers of the world unite, and I know Andy Stern was a fan of all those sayings. I think weren't those the code words used in the Soviet Union 70 years ago?
I think a lot of them were, and that's their whole agenda, and obviously you've tied Andy Stern to the White House and our current president, and something that I want to get in here because I think it's important is that this president is going behind the scenes and appointing people. in recess appointments and signing executive orders and making directions to different agencies like the National Labor Relations Board, where they are changing regulations so that unions can go out and force unionize. And by the way, that's what this is all about, force unionization. Employees rapidly, and again, so they have money for next year's election. And one that just came up again yesterday, I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was I'm probably not going to get this right, it was the Gammons, I think, suit. But it was overturned here recently by the National Labor Relations Board. And what this was all about is that if a company signed a neutrality agreement, which I didn't, but if they did, and the employees were forced to unionize through card check, if the employees wanted to decertify, they had a 45-day window to do so. Okay?
Right.
And several employee groups used that to get out of it. One was Gammons, one was Dana Corporation up in Auburn, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And now that the NLRB has overturned that, these people are now fighting being reunionized and having to join the union and not have the ability to decertify for 4 years.
Right.
So the government, in effect, has taken away their rights.
I think you even said in your speech, David, that if you had to fight this fight today, you may not be able to win it. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. I mean, they're changing these decisions. They're changing regulations. Like one right now is that they want all employers to post the National Labor Relations Act in their application rooms, but most specifically the point where employees can unionize. And, it doesn't give a lot of room for you don't have to, or these are your options if you're being intimidated by a union. And the whole point on this thing is very simple. It isn't to inform the people, because they don't care about the people at all. What it is for is so that the union organizers can go into a business and say, oh, you don't have that posted, we're going to write an unfair labor practice against you.
There you go. Yeah.
And now you've got to defend it, and it costs you legal fees.
Dave, were any of your congressmen or the senators, or was anybody of help? Or it sounds like you basically did this all on your own. Is that true?
It is. Not on my own. I mean, we had great attorneys that helped us, and our employees stood by us, and our management team did a great job in that. But you don't get any help out of the politicians.
But you absolutely had tyranny of the executive branch, and you're relying on the judicial. But both senators and congressmen are sitting on their hands, for lack of a better description of what they're sitting on.
Well, that's right, and I don't, I know they're busy people. They got a lot going on, but fundamentally, it's wrong when you have a group like the big labor bosses that are trying to take away freedoms from Americans, and that's what this is all about. And they turn their heads and they don't pay attention to what's going on behind the scenes with these changes being made at the National Labor Relations Board. Some of the similar things are happening with OSHA. I mean, they've got more people out doing investigations, trying to pin charges on employers to get them to cave in and sign agreements with unions. They're doing things with the EPA to put pressure on businesses. You've heard of the net neutrality stuff. The list just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it's just nonstop, and it's something new every day. Getting back to what Rick said, David. I lost my train of thought.
I bring up as far as the Occupy Wall Street. Carl Horowitz had an article just 2 days ago talking about the direct relationship of the SIU local that supplied the clothes, water, and pizza to. They call them the occupiers, and I call them little thugs. And AFSCME was there, and Richard Trumka himself, the guy that the fact that he's not behind bars someplace for what he did with the Clintons back in the 90s is amazing. But I mean, you've got that, and aren't they down on the southern borders helping organize the illegal demonstrations down there as well as in California, David?
Oh yeah, there's been pictures and put out with the SEIU and communist and SEIU with illegal immigrants, and you have to understand. They see these people as easy to organize. Unions are desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. And they know that they have to go after the people that they can easily intimidate or, easily convince of what they're saying, or people that are very naive. And if you look at the people on Occupy Wall Street, a lot of them fit that description.
David, I lost my train of thought there a second ago, and I just got it back. We had General Valley on our show last month, and getting back to you getting support from the government, General Valley said we absolutely do not have enough warriors in Congress to fight for causes like yours. He said what we really we need a real warrior, and we need an Abraham Lincoln for president to get this straightened, an Abraham Lincoln type person to get this thing straightened out. Are there any congressmen that you can mention or senators that are helping you with your cause more than others?
Well, I know most all the U.S. congressmen here in Indiana, and Todd Young and Marlon Stutzman and the others have helped me, and they did get me involved in Congress. I testified in front of them about the corporate campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
So they're helping. My frustration with that is, and I wrote it in one of my blogs, is that when you go to Washington D.C. And you see what's going on, you wonder how anything is ever accomplished. Because even in the hearing that I was in on the corporate campaigns, there was probably 20 congressmen in that subcommittee, and probably half of them asked decent questions, and I'm talking from either side of the aisle. The other half either use the time, and they all get 5 minutes to question you, by the way, use the time to espouse their philosophy or attack you.
I think I've got some video clips from you in that regard that I have watched.
Yeah, and when you stop and think about that, don't we want politicians that listen and understand what's going on and be fair and say, we can't have these type of things, become educated? Problem is, they're playing politics. There's no term limits. They're trying to stay in as long as they can. They kowtow to whoever is putting money in their coffers, and on the Democratic side, that's the unions for the most part. And they, in turn, try and push for laws and regulation changes that help them.
It reminds me of our former congressman here, David. He once said that nobody was going to tell him how to run his congressional district, and he called people that disagreed with him political terrorists. That's about as far away from the original intent of what you were supposed to do as you can get, isn't it, for a congressman?
It absolutely is, and I'm a big believer in term limits. I think we should have them because a lot of people say, well, you'll have good people that are rotated out, and yeah, that's true, I suppose. But the other side of it is the way our forefathers looked at this is they wanted people from the private sector to come and serve their country for a term or two and go back home to private life. They didn't want full-time people in politics because they knew it would be the downfall of our country.
But another stanza to the term limits, though, David, because the thing that's going around on the internet is the fact of the 26th Amendment, passed in 3.5 months, given the 18-year-old suffrage, and I'm looking at some of the people on Wall Street and wondering why. But and then, let's have an amendment by which Congress people should be ruled by their own laws. I'm sitting there going, if we get people in there that actually understand the Constitution, and I think they're out there. But if we go with term limits, I think we got to term limit the bureaucracies as well, and because this was 25 years ago. I was with a buddy who was a Bronze Star Korean War veteran, and we were listening to John Chafee, who was then a liberal Republican, and then Steny Hoyer, who's now the minority whip. basically say, we're going to give you everything. We're going to give you everything. And then the guys came in later on with whatever cabinet position, said, nah, it ain't going to happen unless you go through us. And we are the power in Washington, D.C., and it doesn't happen without us. And that's where I get frustrated as far as, we've got to keep turning these people in. We only got a limited period of time. We think we have this year's election, but most importantly, next year's election, or we don't get to play anymore. Because, what you've said in your book and what you've said in your speeches and what we had at our Tea Party were people basically saying, this isn't 1930s Germany. We can turn this around, but we've got a very limited time to do that. And I'm not going to accept the break of America. I can't take that. My pop was a prisoner of war. He knew firsthand the gentle mercies of a socialist regime. And then later on, he was a UAW employee for 38 years, and he said he hated it because these union bosses came in and basically they preened for their photos every 3 or 4 years, and then they went out and strike, and the rank and file never made up that time or the money that they lost. So if we're going to do term limits, we got to do it in a couple of ways, but I still think we got a good Constitution, and I know you're not saying we don't, but I got to get my 2 cents in.
Oh no, I agree.
That was a nickel.
But somehow, you have to stop the corruption, and you can't have people in there because they want a job. You have to have people in there because they want to be there. And don't get me wrong, I believe there's a lot of people that are doing it for that reason. But I also know there's an awful lot that don't. And I agree with you. I think we've got a short time period. I believe whoever the Republican candidate is going to face a scorched earth campaign with Obama, because he's going to basically do a corporate campaign against the Republican candidate. It's going to be misrepresentations and all that type of rhetoric, and they're going to use scorched earth ads and everything else.
And we're already seeing a little bit of that already. Yeah. It's going to really get ugly.
Yeah, and they're going to, it's like Obama said the other night. He says, Republicans want dirty water and dirty air. Whoever the candidate is has to stand up and say, Mr. President, that's not true. And it's not true. That's rhetoric. Let's talk about the real issues.
Well, David, and the Vice President, Joe Biden, said that the Republicans want rapes and the crime rate to go up. I mean, that's despicable.
It is, and you have to call them out. And that's one of the things we did when we fought the SEIU, because they did the same thing against us. And we went and talked to some of their groups, like the clergy group. I think you remember some of the stories in that. But and we told them, look, that's absolutely not true. It's not true.
And they're acting on emotion without knowledge.
That's right. And like I say, some of them are just naive. They buy into the movement and the excitement and what's going on, and it sounds good to them, and that. And the big labor bosses are very, very good at pinpointing the crowd and getting them motivated.
Well, David, we are slowly running out of time. I think I told you we were going to have you on for a half an hour, but I knew we were going to have you on the whole time. I just knew that we could be on all day and talk about this. I want to give a shout out to a good friend of ours, and I know he's a friend of yours, and that's Les Naiman. I think Les is sitting at home chomping at the bit to call in, and because of the setup, we can't take his call. But I want to say hello to Les. I know you've been on his show a bunch, David. I know you might want to say hi to him too.
Yeah, Les he's a good old guy, and Les, I hope you're not having a heart attack sitting there listening to this. But
throwing a brick through his radio.
We love you.
Les wanted to remind us that Rudy Giuliani will be at the Crown Plaza Hotel in Louisville near the airport day after tomorrow at 3 p.m. So got that promo in for him. And I like doing quotes on our show. And if you permit me, David, this is by C.M. Weiland back in 1774. Quote, "The greatest, the most dangerous, and the most endurable of fools are the reasoning ones. Without being any less foolish, they conceal from the unreflecting the disorder in their heads by the dexterity of their tongues, and are accepted as wise because they crave more coherently than their brethren in the asylum." I submit we have a regime like that right now, David, and I do appreciate all you've done. I hope our listeners take this to heart. We are not against the rank and file. We are against the tyranny of the elites that would rule our unions, that would rule our people.
Well, you're exactly right, and that's, again, that's why I wrote the book. I'm on